Mr. Sunak will be replacing Liz Truss just 7 weeks after she defeated him in the previous contest. And he takes office at a time of deep economic trouble.
Welcome to the What Matters Today podcast from the Geneva Graduate Institute. I'm Dan Graham, Head of Communications at the Institute. In this podcast series, we ask members of our faculty to comment on key global issues. Boris Johnson's last day as UK Prime Minister was 6 September. On the same day, Liz Truss was elected leader of the Conservatives and thus Prime Minister. However, she resigned after just 44 days in office, making her the shortest serving Prime Minister in UK history. The current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was appointed on 25 October. So to recap, the UK has had 3 Prime Ministers in just 2 months. Many are saying that Britain's political scene is in chaos. However, is this the new normal? What challenges does Rishi Sunak now face? And what does he need to do to help bring stability? Is the UK paying the price for leaving the EU? These are some of the questions that we'll examine in this episode of What Matters Today. My guest today is Cedric Dupont, Professor of International Relations and Political Science here at the Geneva Graduate Institute. Professor Dupont has been a faculty member since 1995 and is also editor of the Swiss Political Science Review and associate editor for Europe of the journal Business and Politics. His research focuses on international political economic issues, both at the global and regional levels, on the problem of international cooperation and international negotiation processes. Well, Cedric, thank you very much for joining us for this episode. I'm going to go into the first question. So over the past few weeks, many headlines have been 3 prime ministers in 2 months or 5 prime ministers in just 6 years in the UK. So basically, many people are now saying that the current situation is political chaos and that this is actually the new normal. So is this accurate in your opinion?
Well, thank you for welcoming me first. Well, it's a new normal as long as the Conservative Party is facing the issue it is facing. But from a constitutional point of view, the British political system has not become unstable because it's not that they're multiplying the election.
Right.
They are actually changed without having election going to actually the citizens.
That's right. Yeah.
So there is a bit of a new normal since the decision to really kind of get out of the EU. But from a constitutional viewpoint, it's not like the British political system has become really notorious and very unstable.
Yeah.
It's simply that the party in power has a lot of leeway to actually changing, to some extent, the prime minister, their chief of party. And that, if it's done too often, then you have this kind of instability.
Right.
So it's I think it's a new normal until the next election, that we're not sure it's not going to rehappen. But it's not that the British system has become really completely unstable. It is really a peculiarity of the system that you can change without having to go to national elections.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you for that. And so Rishi Sunak has actually inherited a number of challenges. In particular, he recently warned that the UK faces a profound economic challenge and pledged to instill, quote, stability and unity, end quote. So what is the nature of that economic challenge and how can he bring both stability and unity in that context?
Well, the challenge are quite multiple from an economic policy making viewpoint. They have an issue of prices rising. They have an issue of adopting the right monetary policy because on one hand, the prices are going up. So you need to tighten a bit monetary policy. But on the other hand, because you have less activity and you have to relaunch activity, you need to have a more easy kind of monetary policy. So the price challenge, the monetary policy challenge, and the third challenge is the debt issue. So, due to COVID-19 particularly, they had to actually just get into higher, more deeper debt, even though that has actually begun before. So you get these 3 challenges that are really hard to really get through because in the whole, you have a recession. At the same time, you have inflation. And so you have to both be strict from a monetary policy or financial policy, but at the same time, you have to actually stimulate the economy. So it's almost like you have to hit the brake and, push the accelerator at the same time, which is actually very difficult. Now, then you have that in a context in which the country is still very much divided on whether they should go kind of more toward the, kind of social spending or more toward kind of austerity and be careful about the debt issue. So you have, I think the most challenging aspect is you have, from an economic viewpoint, kind of tensions, what you can do, what you should be doing, but also from a political viewpoint, you have tension within the dominant party, we just discussed before, meaning you have, still bunch, chunk of the party, the Conservative Party that are, kind of more into center or center right. The other one is kind of farther right. And on top of that, you have still this division, bipartisan division between Labour and Conservative. So you have, both of, lines of friction at the economic level and lines of friction at the political level. Right. So of course, what he needs to do mostly is to calm things down, meaning at least not go for sensational, announcement that we're going to do that, not to be ideological the way he does it. There's no ideological response to such a subtle situation. So I think he needs really to have a much lower profile to let the dust actually come down a bit and then try to find the way. Now, the way is not easy to find. So I think it's, we can blame Truss, what she has been doing, but she was facing a complex situation. The only thing that she did wrong is that she didn't act in a complex and subtle fashion. She wanted to have a simple answer to something that was complex. And we knew from that time that it would actually fail.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And with regards to the economy, because you mentioned COVID as well, the UK seems to be struggling more than other countries, right? Indeed, the economy is still below pre-pandemic levels, which is not the case for countries such as the US, Canada, Italy, France, and even Germany. So how did the UK end up in that situation?
Well, this is the whole debate about the impact of Brexit. Of course, and the difficulty you just mentioned is that if the UK had only had quote unquote Brexit, then maybe the analysis would be easier than Brexit and COVID. Because the two are effects, or the two impact are very difficult to disconnect and to disentangle. But there have been efforts by some economists to try to really, try to see what start back from the situation in the UK before they got out of the EU. I know it's not only at the time they voted on Brexit, they were still in 2019. And so go before COVID situation and try to imagine what would have been the situation if the UK were still in the EU. And exercise of that type are very difficult, but the estimate that they came up with are pretty clear. There is a price for Brexit. So in terms of GDP difference, some have gone as far to say that that's basically lost 4 to 6 points of GDP due to Brexit on top of the COVID thing, which is significant. Same thing about the competitiveness of the UK kind of economy. Trade, according to these estimates, have gone down by 12% compared to if the UK was still in EU. And also investment, which is measured for innovation, which is the most worrisome aspect, is that investment, according to some of people have tried to really see the difference, would be 15% down. So in terms of innovation capacity in the midterm and long term, that would be penalizing. But regarding prices, prices is a bit of a kind of a question mark, because there doesn't seem to be a reason to put on Brexit the causes for the significant higher level inflation. Some people say it's maybe simply just the cycle were different. The British may actually gone earlier into that because they acted earlier on the vaccination strategy, but that's a bit of a question mark. But to go back to your initial question, there is no doubt for many people that are not, ideologically driven, that there is a penalty, economic penalty of that, which, is intuitive, because if you are, to put it in short fashion, the UK is suddenly a much smaller economy than it was before. And if you're a much smaller economy, then you don't have this capacity to attract from the rest of the world or to sell to the rest of the world. And thus, then you're penalizing your economy significantly. Now, the question is how long that would stay. So we could imagine that in the medium to long term, the UK could actually catch up. But this is clearly a penalty from the Brexit, even though it's a very difficult thing to do. And of course, the Leave camp is always going to negate it, because they say, see, we're not doing so badly, at least until 2020, but they didn't get out before 2020. So exactly. Between 2016 and 19 and 20, actually, they were not out. But there is no doubt that they're paying the price for that.
So on that point, so effectively, there's no doubt they are paying the price. But there was a very interesting recent article in The Guardian entitled, quote, Brexit isn't to blame for the current problems. It is still an opportunity. So could this actually be the case?
Well, yes, it can be the case if there are many things that they could not do when they were in the EU. So there is a kind of an interesting bifurcation if you look at the financial services. There was actually different camps in the financial services in London. Those that were more like, big banks, more traditional financial services would actually be the campaign against leaving the EU, because of course then there's the fact that there would be, would have the EU citizen card if you want for banks, so it's actually open then for other services. But on the other hand, you have kind of more, new financial kind of services, including, crypto and all of that, and or fintech, that feared at that time that the EU would be too, trying to impose or kind of harmonize a regulation, and too heavy regulation that was kind of not very conducive to innovation. And those campaigned in favor of the leave. Now, there are plus and minus as we're just going through now a crisis in the cryptocurrency. It's not quite sure, how stable or how good this opportunity is. But of course, if you see EU as something that is constraining and imposing this, common denominator to all, then you could really still think that Brexit may open new opportunities. On the trade front, they made the same argument. We could be more flexible than the EU. We may be a bit more lenient on social standards and environmental standards. But so far, the evidence has been that, not everyone has been, rushing to sign new trade deal with the UK. And thus, simply because the UK is a smaller market. So you may have more opportunities, but people may be less interested. So I think it's really hard. It's an argument which is really hard to negate, because everything can you have opportunities. The reason is how large it is an opportunity. And I think so far, at least, we have not seen it very concretely in action, particularly maybe because the government has not been also very good at, governing the country. So to seize the opportunity, you need someone which is really in command of the country with a lot of backing. And this, for the moment, has been lacking.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. All right, so now we just looked at if Brexit is an opportunity, but now let's look at still some of the challenges it poses, where recently, just a few days ago, the CEO of Next made the news because he was saying how the UK needs more foreign workers. But that was the whole thing that Brexit was trying to block. So is there regret in that direction? Does the UK benefit from still having foreign workers?
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. The UK always needed kind of foreign workers, and they had actually initially after World War II, they followed a different path than a country like Germany, for instance. Because of the Commonwealth, the issue of foreign workers has often been difficult in UK because it's to which extent you want workers or you want citizens. So is these two issues are always very high up in migration, and on Germany and Switzerland they want workers, and then they discover workers are also human beings, by the way, and they may also want citizenship. So in the case in UK, and that was one of the difficult point in the negotiation in the Brexit is they didn't they resisted given permanent resident rights of the EU citizens that were already established in UK. So that was a whole chapter, and vice versa. And this idea is because it really took, I think it is a populist discourse that says that foreigners are going to take job of the native. And it's always this issue. In fact, they are not taking job of the natives. They're actually just complementing or supplementing the natives. And of course, when you're not in the EU, you probably have a more leeway on judging where you draw the line between those that are coming and because they're really highly needed and those that we don't really want to see, this famous Polish plumber or whatever story, that's more of the French story, that you can't really control if you're in the EU. But in fact, the thing is, the risk is that you're creating instability or less stability. So if you're an EU citizen, let's say if you come from former Eastern European country, now member of the EU, would you want to take the risk to go to the UK with having maybe a more precarious kind of status than to go to Germany or to France or the Netherlands and Sweden? So from that perspective, I guess the British have discovered not everyone wants to go to actually live in UK. And so you will have to maybe pay a higher premium, like, the Swiss are paying a higher premium than people are coming to Switzerland. So I think it's probably the illusion that they could be choosing for a wider range of options and maybe at a cheaper price. And I think that's what the UK need to adjust. And of course, taking into account this resentment against, foreigners getting in. But I would think that, the UK has done a relatively good job in this multicultural society, and they should really continue to promote that. But of course, that's not always what the far right, maybe not, or extreme right, but is willing to do. But from that perspective, having a prime minister himself, which is a result of this, kind of British multicultural society, should be a plus and should really open kind of some eyes. But of course, he already said that he would continue this kind of agreement they have from sending back refugees, this agreement that they have with Rwanda, which they would like to keep, which again, is not what they have done in the past, because refugees that would actually travel for 3, 5, 6 months, invest money to come to that country, probably very good entrepreneur, better entrepreneur than natives. But just to summarize this long answer is I don't really think that migration will be a major hurdle, or the need foreign workers will be a major hurdle, because I'm pretty sure the British will adapt to that. Simply they have to really adapt it. It's a change. Getting out of the EU is a major change, and I think they'll need to adapt it. But it's an issue that many other countries that are EU members are also facing. So right. I'm not quite sure to which extent this is due to Brexit, with the caveat of former EU citizens that now are established in the UK.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. It was very interesting. Thank you very much, Cedric. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Professor Cedric Dupont discussing the current political scene in the UK. This podcast series is produced by the Geneva Graduate Institute Communications team. For more information about the Institute, please visit our website at graduateinstitute.ch. I'm Dan Graham. Thanks for listening.